Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Cryonaut TV. I'm Jake, and in this video, we're going to go over layering drums. This is part 2 of our layering series, and in this video, I'm going to go over a few ways you can use kicks or snares and samples or plugins to kind of craft the perfect drum hit. Alright, so in the last video, we went over layering synths. Now, if you just watched it, then you'll realize that there was a couple different layers of these synths to provide normally the low, the mids, and then the highs for your sound. And each layer just adds, to each other to make a fuller sound, a bigger sound. Now, you can do the same kind of thing with drums. Most commonly, this is used for kicks, but you can also use it for things like snares or claps. Pretty much anything you want. Cymbals can be kind of tough, but I guess you could do it if you wanted to. And so typically what you'll hear said is you'll need kind of the initial attack sound, or like the click kind of sound, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes then you'll have the middle section, like the body of the kick, and then the tail. Personally, I don't like using 3 different layers for it. It's just too complicated, and I don't need that much precision, I guess, for my sounds. So I use more of the attack part of the sound, and then just the rest of the kick as 2 different, layers. So, what that can look like is, so if you hear, I have my drum rack, I have a bunch of different kicks down here. So all kinds of different stuff. Some of them are more of like an 808 down here. Some are more just punchy kind of sounds. And so what you can do is you just come in here and just layer them. You can have this sound with this one, and then when you combine them, you get this. So if we mute these, this is what it just sounds like with just the 808. And then when you add it back in, by itself, it's really missing a lot of that tail, so then we add this other one back in. And so that's a really just basic, simple way for layering kicks. Now, with nothing else going on, it's just the 2 sounds layered on top of each other. These work pretty well because one of them is more of a higher frequency kick, and the other is a very low frequency, so there's not too much clashing going on. But sometimes that can be an issue. So if we open up another one here, let's check this one out. So that's kind of the same thing. We have a more higher frequency kick on top and then a little bit lower one. Not the same as an 808, but still more of a thud kind of thing than a hard attack. And so with these 2 are much closer in frequencies. So one thing you really got to be careful of, is, especially once you get past 2 layers, if you start adding 3, 4, 5 different layers to your kicks, they're going to have a lot of frequencies overlapping, which can take away a lot of the power because all your sounds are just getting muddled together. It just can sound very cluttered. And so one thing that you want to try to do is EQ those sounds a little bit to kind of move one kick to one section of the frequency range and cut out almost all the rest of the frequencies, and do the same thing with the other one. If you remember from the layering the synths video, we did that the same thing, where the low kick was just right here, and then everything else was cut out. The mids had the low and the highs cut out, and the high had everything from middle down cut out. And so by themselves, each layer was pretty unimpressive, pretty weak sounding, not very good, but when you add them all together, it's a much cleaner sound, and they all really add together to form a really nice sound. And so for kicks, and drums in general, it's the same kind of thing. So let's see, which ones? These 2. So put an EQ on there, and this one. So this kick was more of the lower kick. So what we're going to do is kind of take out some of the highs. And on this one, we'll take out some of the lows. And so Basically, that just cleans up the sound a little bit. You don't need to be very precise, about all this stuff. Some people obsess over these things, or even others will freak out and say, I don't know how to EQ these layers. That scares me. I don't know what I'm doing. And so they don't even try to layer things. All you need to worry about is just throw on a low pass filter and throw on a high pass filter on the other. Just get it close. I don't really care where this stuff is. I'm just taking out some of the lows and some of the highs. There's still overlapping frequencies. That's fine. It doesn't really matter that much for now. If you really wanted to, you could make it really precise. But if it scares you, if you don't know what you're doing, don't worry about it. Just throw it on there, and it's good enough. This will help immensely, and it's way better than not EQing anything. So just by doing this little bit of EQ, not even worrying about it that much, it really helps the sound clean up a bunch. And all of a sudden you have your own kick. This kick is probably pretty unique. It's going to sound a lot like other ones because a kick is a kick, but it's not going to be exactly the same as anyone else's. Another way you can actually use the samples themselves to kind of craft new layers for your drums and create your own unique drums is by cutting out or leaving in certain parts of the actual waveform. So instead of using EQ to cut down or cut out the low end and then the high end or whatever you're going to do for your sound, you can actually get rid of the beginning attack for the sound or get rid of the whole tail and leave just the attack, things like that. So for this sound, we have, let's see, these two drums going. So with this one, this is more of the just the attack kind of sound. And then this kick, has an attack, but it's more focused on the tail. So if we, so in Ableton Live, we have the sampler and simpler, which is what the drum rack uses. But you can use this with any kind of sampler plugin that you have, whatever you're using. You just want to cut out the beginning or fade in the beginning, whatever sounds best for your samples. So this now becomes this. It's a much softer sound. And you can play with that and adjust it. It really depends on the actual samples you're using and how they interact with each other. So the other one we have, we can, let's just fade out. Maybe cut out some of this. So now we have just a, attack kind of sound, and then the softer tail, which together sounds like this. So you have all kinds of options, do you want to have the two sounds start together but one of them doesn't have the attack, like in this case? Do you want to have this sound fade in, so if we bring this all over to the beginning but then the fade in comes in slowly, you're getting mostly the attack from this kick, and then after that the sound is then fading in to give it that kind of pumping kind of feel and the more 808 sound. Again, it just depends what sounds you're actually using and how they're going to mesh together. So that's really going to come down to a lot of experimentation and just playing around with exactly where the sounds start, where the sounds stop maybe, how they fade in, how much. So just another option for creating your own sounds like that. Some other options for creating a kick, for example, is over here I have another drum rack with the same kicks, and I have analog. Now, two different ways you can do this is you can actually create your own kick entirely with something like a synthesizer here. And basically you just want one oscillator, so disable the other one. Usually you want to have a sine wave, but I guess you can do whatever you want. Maybe the square wave or a triangle wave would be interesting too. Typically it's going to be a sine wave, especially if you're doing an 808, it's going to be a sine wave. So that's what I have here. And if we play this, I have a little bit of noise as well, with a very, very quick attack and quick decay, and it just really, really fast goes away. This is what that's going to sound like. So you can kind of hear a little bit of static at the very beginning, or that's the noise. Obviously, it's very hard to hear that. So let me show you again how I did that. So if we make a new track and throw on analog. All right, so first of all, we're going to disable oscillator 2. We're going to change this to a sine wave. And here's what the sound is right now. Now, if we open up this little clip here, you'll see these are pretty quick notes. If we make them all longer, you'll be able to hear the note for longer. So depending on what kind of kick you want, how long you want the tail to go for, you got to go with this and use the amp section or the envelope section or whatever your synth has, and just adjust the release and the decay depending on what you like. For example, if you... Here, I'll just play the sound and adjust these to kind of show you a little bit different settings you can use. And now, if you aren't familiar with Ableton Live or Analog, this setting right here is adjusting the decay and the sustain. You can kind of watch those numbers change as I move this one. The up and down is sustain, and left and right is decay. And this one adjusts the release over here. So I like it around there. Normally you don't need to worry about the filter or LFOs, but if you wanted to, you could. So now to get the other part of it is the noise, to get that little attack kind of sound. So just by default, it sounds like this. A lot too much for my taste, at least. And so for the noise, I like to filter it to filter 2, which brings it down here. We're not going to use the filter, but we're going to use the amp. And so by bringing the sustain all the way down, the noise will stop as soon as you let go of the note. Bringing the decay down, it'll make it even shorter, just really, really quick, no matter how long you hold the note for. So now you just really want to adjust the decay time to what you like. You can have a whole variety of different types of attack kind of sounds. So you kind of, I don't like having it sound like just noise, but you want to have something there. And so by adjusting the frequency of the filter here, you can kind of get rid of some of the higher end of the noise, which will make it sound less like noise and more like just an attack kind of sound, a click kind of sound. And you can also adjust the color of the noise for just a variety of, and in this synth at least, sometimes you can't. But usually you can choose between white or pink noise, which have a different kind of sound. So just play with that and see what you can come up with. In this case, this is sort of acting like a filter in and of itself. So another area to play with that. Now, the other option, if we turn this off, we'll go back to here. With this analog synth, we have the sound again. What you can do is use this to kind of make the lower sub kind of sound, and then add in a click or a drum or something like that. So here, let's get rid of this. We actually have one already, and so together it sounds like this. Maybe you don't like that sound, but this gives you another whole option to create it yourself. And if you wanted to have various pitched notes, you can do it with the analog and easily change the pitch of the note. It's just playing a scale. So you can come in here and pick whatever notes you want. So this gives you a lot more control over it than rather than using a sample where maybe you don't even know the key of the note and you have to kind of play with it. This way you can play your own melodies super easily. So maybe give that a shot. The last option for doing drum, more kick kind of sounds is to use an actual plugin. In this case, we have the Kick 2 plugin by Sonic Academy. And it's kind of the same thing. This whole section right here shows you the pitch and frequency and all that of the sub down here, which is a sine wave. And you can kind of mess with this too. I just got this a couple days ago, the demo. I haven't even played with it much. But basically you have the sub and then 3 different clicks. So over here you have the different pitch parameters. You have the amp, so a lot of control there. And then each click. Again, like how quickly do you want it to fade? And do you want it to move up and down like an envelope, anything like that? And then you can pick different clicks. So you can hear it's kind of the same thing with our analog. Analog doesn't sound quite the same as this one, but that was making it in like 30 seconds. So if you spend a bunch of time doing it, maybe use Serum, use a different synth, you'd have a different sound. You don't have to use analog by itself. Any synth can do something like this, and they're all going to sound a little bit different. So then here you have 3 different, click kind of sounds, no matter what they are, adding to the sound. And so as you play through them, you can cycle through, you can change the pitch of the click, you can change the length, how quickly does it go away, which is sort of like the envelope we had before. You can filter it, And then down here you have sort of a EQ area and more distortion, some drive, compression. So this kind of brings all the elements you would need all into one package, which is very convenient. So if you want to create your own kicks, but you don't want to go messing around with your own synthesizer and adding in noise or adding in other samples and all that, something like this is a great option. And you don't have to worry about adding in your own compressor and all that. So all the stuff you need is all right here, which makes it very simple. So definitely keep something like this in mind if you wanted to do that. Just one more option for different people. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is layering other kind of percussion or percussive instruments. So if we go back to our drum rack, I have some snare drums and then some snaps and claps. So those ones you can also layer. So here I have a couple different snares. So I have a kick drum playing just to kind of give you a sense of things. But then I've layered 2 different claps or snares. Or in this one, they're 2 different ones. This makes it much harder to tell the 2 different sounds apart, but it's also a really good way to kind of create your own snare. Maybe you like 2 different snares, you want to combine them to make an even bigger one, go for it. Now the tricky part here is a lot of snares are going to be pretty close in frequencies. So unlike the kick where you have a higher frequency, punchy kind of sound and then a lower sub sound, it's easy to mix those 2 together and EQ out the parts. With a snare, it can be a lot more difficult. As we come down here, let's play the first one. All right, it's these 2. So let's put on an EQ. So first of all, let's look at this one. So we can see that the majority of the kick is happening, or the snare is happening right around here, which is 300-ish hertz. And for this one, it's about the same, but it's 270, 280, a little bit lower, but it does have more of a wider spectrum. So this can be very difficult. So in this case, you kind of need to figure out, one, do you want to use a low pass and a high pass on them to have just the higher end and just the lower end? Or do you want to just kind of make a notch filter? So this one is much more singular. It's just right in this area, whereas this snare seems to fill up much more of the spectrum. So maybe for this one, we want to bring this down just a little bit. You know, cut out a little notch for the other snare to come through. And then on this one, we'll kind of fade out everything else. So this snare is mostly coming through here, but everything else is getting cut just a little bit. And this one is just getting cut right where that one snare is happening. So now you have this kind of sound. Again, much more difficult to kind of get to know what to do at least. You don't really have to do any certain things, but I wouldn't recommend layering a couple different snares and just leaving it like that. It's going to get very cluttered, very messy. So you got to EQ something, but it's up to you how you want to do it or what you want to do. So the other option that I was talking about was, let's see, if we kind of do a low pass here, and then the other one, kind of do a high pass, and then you have this kind of sound. Not a whole lot different, but now you have. So it's mainly this snare that's getting cut, because the snare drum usually has a lot of higher frequencies, and so it does have lower ones as well, as you can tell, but the majority of it's going to be between 1 and 10K, depending on what kind of snare you have. So this could work, but I personally think the notch way is better to go with this. Now, lastly, if you're going to do snaps or claps or something like that, where you typically don't just want to have one hit, that's pretty boring. You're not really going to hear that in a whole mix. But what you can do is stack a whole bunch together, especially if you record them yourself or you get someone else to record them. It's not going to be the same timing, not going to be the same. They're all going to be a little bit different. So if you stack a whole bunch of them, then you get, you know, this kind of sound. So in that way, it sounds much bigger. It sounds like a lot of people are doing it. And then the more you get, the bigger it's going to get. And because it's so quick and small, you don't really need to EQ much. There's no point in trying to have one snap take up this frequency and then this one, and you know, just let them all go together. And if you notice that your sound is really not that great and it's sounding really messy, then go in and kind of worry about it a little bit. Maybe you take out one of them if you can figure out, okay, this one is the one that's making that sound bad. You know, if you can figure that out, get rid of that one, but don't worry about EQing each one to a specific frequency range. And in the same kind of thing, claps do the same thing. So this one can be more difficult because if you have a bunch of people clapping, so the snaps was just one person. This clap is a group clap, as you can see by the name. So the timing is going to be way off. So layering a bunch of them together may or may not work. You may need to try some solo claps with group claps, or you know, just play with it, kind of see how it goes. But that has potential to at least be a really good way to, you know, a good way to make your sound bigger, your claps. If you want to really emphasize them, put a couple different layers on, you know, experiment with it. So with this kind of thing, it can really be useful to make your sounds fill up the spectrum more. And especially with like kicks and snares, if you can't really find one that fits your song really well, it seems too weak, or you like a certain part of it but not the rest, that's when you want to layer it. For the other things like snaps and clairs and other percussive kind of things, if you layer a bunch together, it can sound more, much bigger. It's not like a big group of people doing it. So it just depends what you're going for. So that's the basics for layering drum sounds and percussive sounds and things like that. Again, it's going to take a lot of just experimenting and messing with things. Take these examples that I've given you, some of these ideas, and play with it yourself. See what you can come up with, because there's no hard and fast rules about this is how you have to layer drums or kicks or whatever. You can kind of do whatever you want. You can even see that we used analog. We used an actual synthesizer to create a kick. So you can actually use that to create all kinds of drum sounds that may or may not sound very realistic, but it's another option for you. So you have options. You have a lot of different things you can do. So now go take these and put them to use. Use them in your songs and make your stuff more unique. Make your sounds really stand out. Make your songs your own. Make them very unique. So I hope you guys learned a couple things here between layering synths and now layering drums. Those are the two main uses for layering out there today. If you have any other ones that you come up with, let me know and I'll make another video on them, or maybe we'll just start a discussion on how you can actually use layering in your music.